Good morning, children. This is the third part of your lesson, Deep Water. In the first two sessions, we discussed somewhat 4 or 5 pages, and in this part, we will discuss the last 2 pages of the lesson. To make you understand the text so clearly, I included certain pictures in it that will help you to understand the situation in the story. You will also get a clear picture of what is the central message the lesson wants to convey. Now let us go to the story. We can start from here. Bass fishing in New Hampshire, trout fishing on the Deschutes and Metolius in Oregon, fishing for salmon in the Columbia, at Bumping Lake in the Cascades. Wherever I went, the haunting fear of the water followed me. It ruined my fishing trips, deprived me of the joy of canoeing, boating, and swimming. So, because of the fear that had happened at the YMCA pool, he couldn't enjoy any water sport. Let us go and watch the different kinds of fishes and the rivers and lakes that he described in USA. Let us go. Look at this picture. This is the bass fish. For him, fishing was a hobby. He wanted to do it, but he couldn't. This is the Hampshire River in US. He wanted to go there and do the bass fishing, but he couldn't. Look at the trout fish. He wanted to fishing trouts also, but he couldn't. He wanted to do it in this river. He wanted to do trout fishing in this river, Deschutes, but he couldn't. And trout fish is available in this river also, Metolius. He wanted to do fishing in all these places, and he wanted to go here, the Bumping Lake, to engage in some water sport, but he couldn't because of the fear that gasped him. He also wanted to do for canoeing in rivers, but he couldn't because of the old terrifying fear in him. Come to the next paragraph. I used every way I knew to overcome this fear, but it held me firmly in its grip. Douglas tried his maximum to avoid this fear from his mind, but its grip was so strong, so he couldn't. Finally, one October, I decided to get an instructor and learn to swim. As the final way to avoid this fear from his mind, he decided to appoint an instructor, and he did it. I went to a pool and practiced 5 days a week, an hour each day. So he found one pool and went there 5 days in a week. Every day he practiced 1 hour. The instructor put a belt around me. A rope attached to the belt went through a pulley that ran on an overhead cable. In a very strange way, the instructor taught him how to swim. He adopted a new technique to teach Douglas swimming. because Douglas was so worried, so fearful, get into water. So the instructor put a belt around his waist and then attached the belt with a rope, and the rope that ran through a pulley, and the pulley was oscillating along the overhead cable, and the rope was controlled by the instructor. Look at that. Look at the method the instructor used with Douglas. A belt around his waist and a rope tied with it. Then he was allowed to swim. He held on to the end of the rope, and we went back and forth across the pool, hour after hour, day after day, week after week. So, along with the instructor, with the full control of the rope, Douglas's full body weight was controlled by the instructor. He held it at one side of the pool and let Douglas move forth and back. On each trip across the pool, a bit of the panic seized me. Whenever he crossed the pool, the panic that began to seize him. Each time the instructor relaxed his hold on the rope and I went under. So, to check how much he had learned, the instructor sometimes loosened his hold. And at that moment, Douglas went down, and the old fear quickly came back to his mind. And some of the old terror returned, and my legs froze, and the terror began to freeze his legs. It was 3 months before the tension began to slack. He took around 3 months to reduce his tension. Slack means to reduce, to loosen the tension in him. Then he taught me to put my face under water and exhale, and raise my nose and inhale. Then the instructor taught him how to exhale and inhale inside the pool. I repeated the exercise hundreds of times. Bit by bit, I shared part of the panic. So, bit by bit, piece by piece, he shed part of his panic, not the complete panic, the complete terror, the complete fear in him, part of it, he shed it. That seized me when my head went under water. Gradually, he was free from the fear that caught him. Next, he held me at the side of the pool and had me kick with my legs. Then he trained his legs. For that, the instructor put him at the side of the pool and let him held on the embankment, the side of the pool, and let him use his legs to beat his legs on water. And the legs refused to work. For weeks I did just that. At first my legs refused to work, but they gradually relaxed, and finally I could command them. At the beginning he felt it was a difficult task because he couldn't control his legs. Gradually, he gained control over his legs and he started commanding them. Come to the next paragraph. Thus, piece by piece, he built a swimmer. So, piece by piece, not as a whole, he gave a training in each part of his body. For head, for hands, for legs and body. Thus, piece by piece. And when he had perfected each piece, he put them together into an integrated whole. And after giving each partial training, he put all them together and made an integrated whole. In April, he said, "Now you can swim. Dive off and swim the length of the pool, crawl stroke." In April, the instructor said Douglas was now capable of swimming alone without the support of the instructor. He commanded him, dive off and swim the entire length of the pool. He said, the crawl stroke, that is the normal stroke. I will show you one picture of how to do that crawl stroke. Look at this posture of swimming. This is the normal way of swimming, that is the crawl stroke. I did. The instructor was finished. So when he performed this, the instructor said his duty was over. His instruction was over. He was finished. But I was not finished. But with Douglas, it was not the end of learning the art of swimming. I still wondered if I would be terror-stricken when I was alone in the pool. That was his doubt. When he was alone at the pool, whether he would be stricken by the fear. That was his doubt. I tried it. I swam the length up and down. For that, he came alone. He swam up and down the entire length of the pool. Tiny vestiges of the old terror would return. But tiny means small. Tiny vestiges. Vestiges means that mark. A faint mark. Tiny faint mark of that old fear started coming back, would return. But now I could frown and say to that terror. But now he was capable of frowning at the terror and asking the terror that, trying to scare me? You want to scare me, terror? Well, here is to you. Look, and off I would go for another length of the pool. If you come back, I will show you. I will go once again. In this way, he wanted to overcome the fear that seized his mind so terribly. Come to the next paragraph. This went on until July. This practice he continued from April to July. But I was still not satisfied. He alone tried from April to July, but he was not satisfied yet. I was not sure that all the terror had left, because still he was not sure that all the terror that seized his mind left him. So I went to Lake Wentworth. So he decided to go to a bigger water body, a lake, to swim and find whether any vestiges of that terror left in him. Let us go to the next page. Wentworth in Hampshire. Dived off a dock at Triggs Island. I will show you this Triggs Island. Look at this lake. This is Lake Wentworth in Hampshire. He went there to check whether any tiny vestiges of fear that left in him. Look at this. This is Trix Islands Lake at Wentworth. This is the Trix Island. From here to the next island he swam. And swam 2 miles across the lake to Stampact Island. I swam the crawl, the breaststroke, side stroke, and backstroke. All the styles of swimming he practiced during this 2 miles swimming. Only once did the terror return. Only once the terror came back to him. When I was in the middle of the lake, that was the deepest point of the lake. When he reached at the deepest point of the lake, that fear came back in him. I put my face under and saw nothing but bottomless water, because he saw only the bottomless water there. The old sensation returned in miniature. When he sensed that bottomless water around him, the old sensation of fear that came back in miniature, in a minute way, I laughed and said, "Well, Mr. Terror, what do you think you can do to me?" He conversed with the terror and it fled, and I swam on. Then the fear fled away from him, and quietly, happily, he swam across the river. Come to the next paragraph. Yet I had a residual doubts. Residual means very tiny. Doubts remaining in his mind. At my first opportunity, I hurried west. He went to the west side of USA, went up the Titan to Conrad Meadows. He went to the Titan River, and from there to Conrad Meadows, up the Conrad Creek Trail. He walked up the Conrad Creek Trail to the Made Glaciers. Then finally he reached at the Made Glacier. I will show you the pictures of all these places. And camped in the high meadow by the side of Warm Lake. So his aim was to reach at the Warm Lake in USA. The next morning I dived into the lake and swam across to the other shore and back. The next morning he removed his ordinary dress and put on his swimming suit and dived into the Warm Lake and swam across to the other shore and back, just as Doug Corporon used to do. Doug Corporon, an American adventurous swimmer, he used to swim up and down this Warm Lake, a dangerous thing to do because it was too lengthy. I will show you the lake, the Warm Lake in USA. Douglas from Titan to Conrad Meadows went, and from Conrad Creek Trail. This is the Conrad Creek Trail. He walked up and reached Made Glacier, and later he camped in the high meadows by the side of the Warm Lake. He swam across the entire distance and this this mountains echoed his voice of success, voice of conquer. I shouted with joy. And Gilbert Peak, the mountain range there is named Gilbert Peak. That mountain ranges retained the joyous echo that he made. I had conquered my fear of water. Finally, he declared himself that he conquered the fear of water. When he cried in joy, the Gilbert Mountains echoed his words. The experience had a deep meaning for me, as only those who have known stark terror and conquered it can appreciate. Only those people who have experienced such a stark terror can only appreciate this experience. He says, in death there is peace. He says, in death, nothing to worry. There is peace. There is terror only in the fear of death. But the fearful thing is the fear about death. That is what he wanted to establish here. In death, you need not worry anything at all. It is peaceful. But the fear of death, that is the most fearful thing we have to bear with. He says, as Roosevelt knew when he said, Roosevelt, one of the famous American presidents, he made a legendary speech in 1933 at the White House about fear. All we have to fear is fear itself. So the only thing that we have to fear is the fear in our mind. It is psychological aspect of fear. Fear is nothing but a psychological thing that affect our mind. If we overcome that feeling of fear, we can avoid, we can conquer this world, we can achieve our aims. For that, we have to remove the fear from our mind. This fear is the barrier for many of our achievements. Once we remove this psychological fear from our mind, we can achieve anything. That is what Roosevelt says here. Fear is the only thing that we have to fear. Because I had experienced both the sensation of dying and the terror that fear of it can produce. Douglas says, he had experienced both the sensation of dying. When he drowned in the YMCA pool, he had experienced the sensation of dying. Till at the stage of unconsciousness, what a human can feel about death that he had. And the terror that fear of it can produce, then the entire life of him, the later life of him was haunted by the terror that sensed him his death. I had experienced both the sensation of dying and the terror that the fear of it can produce. So Douglas, he experienced both. The fear of death, that was more fearful than the real death. He come to the conclusion. The will to live somehow grew in intensity. So when the fear of death that capture our mind, then the will to live somehow that started growing in our mind intensely. Look at the last paragraph. At last I felt released, free to walk the trails and climb the peaks and brush aside fear. Once he overcome this fear from his mind, he was free to swim or climb up mountains or walk on the ridges. Everything he overcame. So, how does he achieve it? His perseverance and his endless effort, his courage that enable him to overcome this fear that has grasped his heart very deeply. When he realizes that with this fear he can't lead his normal, enjoyable life, he challenges the fear. That is the victory he finally finds. Through this lesson, he tells us that fear is the greatest barrier for our life. If we face this challenge courageously, we can finally emerge successful. That is the lesson he tells us through this deep water. In this lesson, we see that his deliberate, his planned, and continuous effort that makes him enable to overcome his fear from his mind. One thing we can notice about Douglas's character is he was absolutely determined to overcome this fear. For that, he uses his perseverance and resoluteness that he emerged victorious. So, this lesson tells us the message that if we keep any kind of fear in our mind, that becomes an obstacle for our success in life. So we have to avoid this fear from our mind first to succeed in our life. That is the great message Douglas wants to convey through this lesson.